Welcome to Nurses with Voices, the podcast where we amplify the voices of nurses everywhere. I'm your host, Dr. Lindra James, DNP RN, and I am thrilled to go on this podcast journey with you. Through this podcast, we aim to educate, empower, and inspire nurses at every stage of their careers. Whether you're a novice nurse navigating the challenges of bedside care, an experienced clinician looking to advance in your field, or dreaming of becoming a nurse entrepreneur, Nurses with Voices is here for you. Together, we'll explore the triumphs, struggles, and countless opportunities that come with being a nurse. So tune in, subscribe, and let your voice be heard, because here at Nurses with Voices, every nurse has a story worth sharing, and every nurse voice deserves to be amplified. Welcome back to another episode of Nurses with Voices. I'm your host, Dr. Lindra James, DNP RN, and today we have a truly compelling episode for you. In the previous episode, we touched on the heart-wrenching story of a young nurse, DonQuenick, who faced discrimination and was reported for manslaughter, ultimately losing her job. Her story, it resonated deeply with many of you, and today we are going to really delve in a little further into this case with someone who has been closely involved in advocating for her. But before we dive into today's discussion, I want to refer you to episode 15 to really set the stage and a prelude to the interview featuring Dr. Dawn Morris. Dr. Morris is a PhD prepared nurse and healthcare law attorney who provides a unique perspective on legal intricacies, I should say, and challenges that nurses face. So we discussed, and that was a prelude to today's discussion. So now joining us today is Gerard Soucy. Gerard is the chief concierge at Concierge to the Dying at Dismissal. I'm probably saying it right. He'll say it more eloquently, where he has really dedicated his career to supporting patients and families through serious illnesses. This is his own practice with end-of-life care. With 50 years of experience in nursing, Gerry C. has seen firsthand the impacts of systemic issues in healthcare. And Gerry has been instrumental in supporting DonQuenick's case, really working to bring her story to light and advocate for justice, right? So his extensive background and commitment to anti-racism in nursing really makes him a vital voice in our conversation today. So Gerry, welcome. Gerard, I'm so sorry. Gerard, welcome.
Right, yeah.
Can you really start by telling us a little bit about who you are and why is DonQuenick's case important to you? Like, what motivated you to take up this cause?
Sure. No, that. So for myself, I'm retired or semi-retired at this point. My clinical experience has been in serious illness and end of life in the hospice setting, and also in critical care. When I worked in critical care, I was particularly drawn to the situations where the patient was not going to leave alive. For DonQuenick, back in late 2021, I had connected with a number of nurses on Twitter, and one of the nurses, a nurse named oh my god, I'm gonna blank on his name, but Nurse Pat. If folks are out on Twitter, they may know Nurse Pat, and he and several others organized a Twitter Spaces, an online discussion about racism in nursing. And as we were talking and as people were joining the group, DonQuenick had heard about us, and she joined the group and described her story. And it's a little complicated initially, but it was very clear that this was a difficult situation, that she had lost her job, that she was unhoused, that anti-Black racism was at the core of everything that happened to her. And so after she kind of talked about what had happened, someone went offline, got some more information. And then, those of us in the group began to kind of stay in touch with DonQuenick. And, myself, as pretty much retired, I've got time available. And so we ended up talking more. She was trying to get a stable housing situation. She was trying to basically, kind of keep her head above water. And at one point, as we were talking, she had found a housing situation that looked promising, that was also going to be an opportunity for her to spend time with her daughter. She's divorced, and her daughter lives with the dad, but she was going to be able to spend time with DonQuenick in this housing situation. And the housing situation turned out to be really dangerous. And so, I said, all I can offer is you can come here. And I live alone in this big old house. I'm a widow. My children are grown. And so she said, okay. And so what followed has been, what followed from there was an attorney, her connecting with a really good plaintiff's attorney for employment law, who took on the case, who looked at the material associated with the case and was flabbergasted. It really is an outrageous set of circumstances with a very detailed paper trail. And so everything that was done, everything that was said, whether it was true or not, the fabricated narratives are also part of the record. So it's all out there for people to see. And I think if I could kind of simplify the story, because there are lots of layers to it. But in essence, this was a case of a very caring, committed, compassionate, and expert nurse going into a setting, a medical center of Aurora outside of Denver, a large 40 or 50 bed mixed critical care unit. DonQuenick's specialty was trauma. And over the course of working there for 2 years, in the first year and a half, she accumulated 3 Daisy Award nominations. And I think Daisy Award nominations, I think, are important because someone has to make an effort to say, hey, that nurse was really good, and here's why. And so she got a Daisy from a family of a patient there that she had worked with. She got a Daisy nomination from the friend of another patient. And then she got a third nomination from a colleague who talked about following DonQuenick, and everything would always be organized, and also the way that DonQuenick was able to connect with a lot of patients. Because again, in a trauma situation, right, you've got uncertain prognosis, you've got a real long road ahead, and she did really well. And I think one of the problems of being an excellent Black nurse is white nurses don't like that. I think it really, what I can see and put together is that, her performance really just intimidated a lot of people. And go ahead.
Go ahead. I'm so sorry.
Well, that's all right. So, here's a white guy, an old white guy in nursing, talk to you about racism in nursing. What do I have to say? And I think as a white guy in nursing, I'm outside the power majority. I'm not a white woman, but I am a white guy. So either, if I have to jump, I've had places to land, or if I've been pushed, I had options on where to land. And so going back to that Twitter Spaces conversation, when I heard aspects of what DonQuenick was telling us, I could picture it in my head immediately. I could picture in my head a group of nurses kind of like gathering in a corner and conspiring, and just I could picture them doing something really malicious. And that's not to slam all nurses by any means. I've been accused of hating nurses. I'm a nurse and I married a nurse, and it's been an important part of my life. So, but I am critical. And so when DonQuenick kind of described that instance, described what happened, I could picture it happening in my head. And so what the story is 2 years of escalating harassment, from microaggressions, from giving her crappy assignments, from saying things. She had a charge nurse look at her and say, well, you do such a good job washing patients. Why don't you come over to my house and you can clean my house and clip my dog's toenails? And he wrote that in a text. And, so it's that kind of daily stuff. At one point, it's a large unit and pretty much one big unit, but there was a separate pod down a hallway and up a flight of stairs. And that's where she was mostly assigned to. So she was out by herself in like a satellite pod with up to three patients. So separated from the rest of the staff, no access to the locker room, the break room, anything like that. Should be alone. And just, again, this kind of slow day by day accumulation of all these, injustices and harassments and things. And the basic story is this, that an elderly man in his early 90s was at home being cared for by his niece, who was also his healthcare proxy. And he had multiple chronic conditions, and he was deteriorating at home. And as he was dying, as he transitioned into dying, she panicked and called 911. And though there was a DNR order in place for him, and he already had his funeral arrangements made, they transported him. He was in respiratory failure. He was in septic shock. They worked on him very aggressively for like 4 to 6 hours. In the ED, they ran a femoral art line. They put in an IJ. They worked up the sepsis protocol, which triggered something like 60 or 65 individual orders in that order set. So 5 o'clock in the morning, DonQuenick's working nights. She's 2 hours from the end of her shift. She gets a call. She had 2 patient assignment that night. You need to transfer one of your patients out because you're getting a patient from the ED. So she worked to transfer the patient out to the floor, turn over the room, went down to the ED to get report because she said, I need to see what's coming upstairs. And it was this man, this unconscious man on a ventilator with all kinds of aggressive life-sustaining treatments going on, transported up to the room, and he wasn't maintaining his pressure. He was on, first he was on 1 pressor, then on 2, then on 3, and it just wasn't working. And his niece at the time, when she came into the room and saw everything that was happening, she said, oh my goodness, what's this? And alarms are going off, and the niece is looking at a horrifying situation, and DonQuenick is doing her thing. She's got a new patient, and so she's doing an assessment. She's taking off orders. She's calling for meds. And when the niece said what she said, DonQuenick started making calls, tried to get a physician. And so now, we started this at about 5:30. So now we're getting more like towards 6:15, 6:30. Day staff is coming in. The attending physician for days is coming in. He was also the unit medical director. And the day nurse and DonQuenick was going to hand over these patients. They were able to reach, they were able to get the attending physician over to talk with the niece. And he said, okay, he says, we're redirecting care to support the goal of a peaceful death. We're going to discontinue all of these pressors. And that was the order. So DonQuenick's stayed with that patient because the day nurse was also getting the second patient, right? Again, so DonQuenick has seen 3 patients in this, including this very severely ill patient, at the end of her shift. So the day nurse goes to take care of the other patient who was advanced cancer, trached on a vent with a PCA. He was conscious, but he was very sick. So the day nurse is taking care of him, and DonQuenick is implementing, the orders, withdrawing care. And so as she's doing that, and as this guy is actively dying, she paged respiratory therapy to come and extubate the patient so that, they discontinue the ventilator and extubate the patient. And he said, well, I can't be there right now. I can't, I'm in rounds on, in the other pod. You'll have to wait. And a few minutes later, she called again. She said, this guy is dying with or without us. And how do you turn off the ventilator? And so he said, okay, there's a switch on the back. So she turned off the ventilator and stayed with the patient and with the niece and prayed as the guy died. And so she wrote up the note and left. And she got a call a few days later. Maybe that chronology might have been sooner, but she got a call saying, hey, there's a problem with that patient. You need to come in. And they basically read her the riot act. Said, you practice outside of scope. You caused the patient to suffer. This was absolutely abominable. And you're fired. And so, all right, as that was sinking in, and dealing with all of the
Oh, I'm
implications.
sorry, Gerard. Let me just so let me understand this correctly. So she
Yep.
has a patient who came in, who was a hospice patient, who they intubated. They did all of the things that they shouldn't have done, but they did them because there was no clear direction. The physician comes in and says, no, we're going to remove them from life support. The niece comes in and they decide to turn everything off. And so she shuts off the machine and the patient passes away and she basically gets fired. I mean, I'm really just summing it up, but is that what I'm hearing?
Yeah, no, exactly. And it's, I've been able to go through the court documents, the documents released on discovery, when the attorneys are looking at all the background information and everything. And that included a complete dump of the medical record for that patient. And in going through the notes, I mean, there's lots of things going on. One of the things that I caught was the emergency room physician, in writing up his note, said that he spoke with the niece and that she agreed to supportive care with pressors and intubation. Now, that's a problem right there, because supportive care is not the same as aggressive, life-sustaining therapies. And so, right, and this we see this all the time, this inability to communicate, or this miscommunication, or what supportive care is. Supportive care to me is different from what you think of when you hear supportive care.
Right.
Kind of vague terms. So it was, in a lot of ways, it was a very messy situation, kind of every step of the way. I don't know if the man was on hospice at home. I'd like to think that if he was, that the 911 call wouldn't even have been made.
Right. But we know sometimes it does. You have people in hospice and family they get nervous and they panic and they will call 911.
Yep. And so the narrative, so here's what happened. So after she was fired, and these are nurses at senior levels in the hospital. This was a director of quality improvement and safety, also the interim director of critical care, and a charge nurse. And none of them are at that hospital anymore. But the QI safety person filed a report with the Department of Public Health and Environment, said, we have a troublesome death here. It looks like it was the result of neglect and a nurse practicing outside of scope causing harm. And so they constructed this narrative and submitted it to the state, which was not accurate, which is very distorted. And the state responded with an investigation and charges of manslaughter and abuse of an adult. So DonQuenick was not only fired, but now she was charged with 2 felonies resulting from this case.
So, and this is all because, and I'm just trying to wrap my head around this, and this is because they're saying she practiced outside of her scope because she turned off the ventilator?
Yep.
Was he made a DNI?
Oh, yeah, he was a DNR all along. And, and he was actively dying.
Right.
I know, how people die has been part of my practice. And there are lots of things happening in the body as we die. And what they've constructed their narrative around is that this was a living, breathing patient who was suffocated. This was a living, breathing patient that in one communication, somebody said she caused the patient to drown in front of his niece, a horrible situation. So that's their narrative. And, again, getting down to language, you and I are living, breathing people, right? We are living, breathing people. We're talking. At some point, we will be dying. We won't be living and breathing. We will, there will be some processes going on, but we're dying. And, that was going on with this man, not just that night or not even that week, but this was a long process that had been playing out for quite some time. And this was just the end. And to my mind, having not just looked at the material, but also thinking about this case, what DonQuenick did in that particular case demonstrated expert practice, that she was faced with a chaotic situation. And instead of running around chasing alarms, chasing the monitor, focusing on all of the wrong things, she was really able to see what's most important at this point. What's most important here is that this man die peacefully and that his niece have a memory of his death that is some source of comfort to her. This could have gone, this case, from my view, was like every step of the way, people were doing the wrong things and saying the wrong things. And it wasn't until DonQuenick was there that somebody did something right. And, to enable this man to have a peaceful death. And in part of this whole process, like when the state was doing its investigation or around the manslaughter charges, they interviewed the niece. The niece had no idea that this was even going on. And they said, oh, can you tell us about, your uncle's final moments and stuff? And she said, oh, I see. Yes. The nurse was Black, and she was very, very nice. And she helped me. And I told her, I mean, this woman was elderly herself and had been in the hospital for hours. And she said, I told her, I have cancer. I'm fainting. I need something to eat. And she got me a sandwich and a cup of coffee. And the main nurse I was dealing with was Black, and she was very nice. And the other ladies were coming in and out on his vitals, but that's about it that I can recall. So for this woman, her memories of her uncle's death are that there was a good nurse, stayed with her.
Better. Gave her something when she was, tired.
That's something out of the gospel, right?
Right.
I was tired. I was hungry. I was sick.
And she fed me, right?
Yeah.
So if this had, so the picture, so you have to really look at this from a different angle, because if this was, you would remember if it was horrific experience, right?
Oh,
Like
yeah.
that is something that you would remember.
All your life.
Would remember, she remembered that she was Black. She remembered that she told her that she had cancer and that she went and got her some food. So she comforted her, is what I'm
Absolutely.
hearing, at a
Yes.
time when, she had a loved one dying. And if
Yeah.
it was otherwise, she would remember that. And it just goes along with when we talk about perception and reality and
Yeah.
experience and patient satisfaction. You remember what happened if something was, outside of what your expectations would be. And
Yeah.
so this really highlights the severity and the impact of, the accusations and the discrimination that she faced. And, you mentioned the concept of truth and reconciliation in addressing racism. And can you elaborate on what that means and how it can be applied in the nursing
Sure.
profession?
Sure. And so that term came up. I was able to, I've been, as you know, I've been developing a series of videos,
Mhm.
instructional videos to lay out the details of DonQuenick's case, as well as the broader context, talking about nursing and the demographics of nursing, talking about, the structures that are in place and that people work under, as well as the specifics of the events of her case. I mean, the final video is going through that medical record and going through people's notes and comparing the narratives. I mean, the contrasting narratives. You know, one thing that's significant is that when the QI nurse submitted the information to the Department of Public Health, um, they didn't tell the attending physician, who was the medical director of the unit and who was responsible for this patient. They didn't say, we submitted that death as a suspicious death to the Department of Public Health. He didn't know about this until he gave a deposition, until he got an email asking if he would come and give a deposition. And the hospital attorney said, oh yeah, we need to tell you. And like 4 years later, he's like, wait, what? Because if he had known that there was some movement on this death, he would have said, this was a normal death. This was an expected death. This gentleman arrived here in an unsurvivable state. And I spoke with the niece and I gave these orders, and the orders, and he also wrote up his notes. So, comparing, when I say it's all on the record, it really is. And when you compare the two side by side, you've got inconsistent stories.
So this is
Oh,
just
but you
go
asked me about truth and reconciliation too. I'm sorry.
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
No.
but as I was preparing the material, I came across, very thankfully, I came across a report that came out just last year, and it was funded by the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation and Dr. Monica McLemore, who's out at the University of Washington. She's a real, figure, a giant in this field. She's also interim director of, I don't know the name of it, but it's at the University of Washington School of Nursing. It's the Center for Anti-Racism in Nursing. And so she worked with a couple colleagues and developed this report last year that surveyed what's going on in nursing around anti-racism efforts. What's out there, what's working, what's not. And, they found that most of the stuff that's out there isn't working. They interviewed the nurses, so the nurses gave their own experiences of racism throughout their careers. And what they concluded is like, look, we don't need, this or that or the other thing. What we really need is truth and reconciliation. One of the things that motivated me is that, in the last several years, as the topic of racism in nursing is getting more attention, there's kind of I pick out several themes. There's celebrating excellence and celebrating the accomplishments of people who've been ignored for too long. I think that's awesome. There's some attempts to look in history and talk about historical events illustrating racism in nursing. And okay, there's work in academia and publications that's got kind of a limited audience. Most nurses don't pick up Nursing Outlook or these other journals, so that word doesn't get out. But one thing that I hadn't seen was anything that centered the people harmed by racism in nursing. And getting into the details, not to shame and blame and punish and berate the perpetrators, but to make it clear who the perpetrators are and what they did, so that truth and reconciliation, and also, just to uncover the rest, because, DonQuenick is one nurse, but she's not the only nurse. And this is probably one of the worst examples of racism in nursing, as far as like taking it to extreme, being extra about it. But certainly not the only instance. So it really, that was the motivation, not just to help DonQuenick tell her story. And DonQuenick tells her story, but it's pretty traumatic. So I said, let me do the talking. You've talked enough. She's been deposed 4 times. If anybody's been in a civil suit, basically you get deposed once. You go through a deposition. And those can be pretty rough because there's no judge present, so the lawyers can get pretty aggressive. And the defense has come back time and again saying, hey, we want to depose her again for this reason. And the magistrates so far, approved. They've got their last deposition coming up, which will be her 5th. And then we move on to a pretrial conference in August. So, and this is the homicide charges were dismissed, and they were dismissed in the interest of justice. And the interest of that can mean 2 things. A prosecutor, and that was the case in DonQuenick's case, that a prosecutor can make a motion to dismiss in the interest of justice. And that can mean we really don't have a case here. And we're not going to win, so it's in everybody's interest to just dismiss this. There's also, in some states, judicial, the judge can dismiss a case in the interest of justice. In an instance where, say, if they've got an aggressive prosecutor who keeps bringing these low-level drug offenses to court, the judge might say, hey, in the interest of justice, we need to shut this down. So her case was dismissed, and because the case was dismissed, she's now able to turn to the hospital and to these 3 named individuals, these 3 nurses, and say, okay, this is a civil action and you're the defendants. DonQuenick isn't in court. She would sometimes use a statement, well, I'm in court, in federal court in District of Colorado. And I'd say, well, you're not in court. You brought them to court. You're not the defendant. You're suing them. You're the prosecutor. Your lawyer's the prosecutor. And so that's what this case is about. And, they're fighting hard against, they're digging in their heels. This is a hospital owned by the Hospital Corporation of America. So they're part of a big for-profit chain. This is a hospital that has also been certified as magnet 3 times, including in 2019 when this all came down, they were recertified again. So there's a lot about this case beyond the specifics of it that also raise some questions about what's going on in nursing.
Right. Well, this is so enlightening. And, when you talk about truth and reconciliation, along with everything else that you said, I love the idea of surveying nurses to really understand the impact and, really look at anti-racism in nursing and the environment, and to really see that this is a systemic issue, right? And I love how you said this is not just a DonQuenick issue, right? Because it is. She's just one, and it probably is one of the worst cases that I've heard of. And if there's others out there, this is how we start to make change, right? And this is how we create a movement. And because it is a systemic issue, and it manifests, and it is particularly manifest in high stress environments. And from what we've said today, it's almost sounds like, she's been rewarded multiple times. And so now we've decided that we don't like the idea of someone, you know, be de- obtaining all of this recognition that we're not getting. So we're going to make her, it's almost like we've changed her life and taken away her livelihood over
Well, the cruelest,
discrimination or jealousy or cattiness or high school behavior.
yeah, yeah, yeah,
And
the
I guess my
cruelest,
my
I'm
mhm.
sorry.
No,
Uh,
go ahead. You were saying
okay,
it is
sure.
cruel, but
Yeah,
I
no,
want you to
yeah,
finish your
what they did
statement.
to her, they took it 180. What I said, that Don Quinique evidenced expert nursing practice in this encounter. Saw through the chaos, saw what was most important, made it happen, was there. She was able to think outside the box, but also take responsibility for thinking outside the box. I mean, all of it. And what these three white nurses did is they said, "Oh no, you're not an expert nurse. You're a killer."
Wow, that's powerful. Well, how do
And
you think systemic issues like racism manifest in high stress environments like the ICU? And what do you think can be done about it?
ooh, yeah. Well, let me preface by this. The first time I worked with a Black nurse was 30 years after I graduated from nursing school. And it was at a big academic medical center. And it was a 20-bed unit. We had over 100 nursing staff, and we had one Black nurse on staff. So, my own observations and experiences are in practice have been pretty limited. Um, I think probably the most important thing is, and I'm talking to white nurses here, is we have to look at ourselves. Because if there's racism in nursing, and if 80% of nurses are white and 89% of nurses are women, um, do the math and kind of say, okay, where's the easiest place to start, or where's the best place to start? Where's the problem coming from? Racism is coming from white nurses. So the first thing is we all have to look at ourselves really hard. And the other part of it for me, and this is where someone said, "Oh, you hate nurses." I said, "No, but I need to push back on this idea that every one of the 5.2 million registered nurses in America are all wonderful, expert, ethical, um, because that's just not human nature." I mean, I used to think called the Cartman rule, from the cartoon series South Park, because Cartman is one of four kids in that gang, and he's a jerk. He's irredeemable every single episode. Even when you think like, "Oh, Cartman's looking good," no, he's irredeemable. And I apply that to the world, that 25% of any given group is irredeemable, and nurses aren't exempt. From the Cartman rule. So out of 5.2 million registered nurses, there's a good million and a quarter that, wow, that's how I see it anyway. And
Yeah.
so white nurses, we got to look at ourselves and say, hey, we're not, images of purity. We're not, you know, well, I guess, I guess that's what we really
Well,
need to look at ourselves hard.
right. Hold up the mirror. And yeah, I get it. The phrase, how can you address what you won't even talk about, is powerful, right? And that's what we're
Yeah.
doing today. We're talking about a systemic issue that really, opens up dialogue, right? And, in your opinion, why do you think it's important to have open dialogue about racism in nursing? And why do you think it's so challenging? And like, what steps can be taken from your perspective to really foster these critical conversations?
Um, I think talking and opportunities to talk, podcasts, publications, all of that, we just need to keep getting the word out. Um, I mean, it's I wish I could answer that question. Um, I think it's all a matter of really being honest with ourselves. And I think one of the problems or one of the issues that I've seen in nursing over the last several years is really this reluctance to look at the hard, cold reality of there are
Right.
3 white nurses at this magnet hospital who clearly, and not only did they do it, but they were also deposed under oath. And, one was asked, that was not true information that you submitted. Am I right about that? And the person said, yeah, you're right. Yeah,
Wow.
yeah,
So she admitted it. She admitted that the
yeah.
information that she submitted was false.
Oh yeah,
This is like a perfect example of what I mean about opening up dialogue. So this opens up a huge dialogue because you start to recognize and see like what is going on behind the scenes. We had an opportunity to jeopardize and ruin this nurse career, and I chose it. I chose to do that, and why? And these are the type of conversations we should be having. She's being deposed and she's admitting that she submitted false information. How critical is that?
yeah, yeah. I mean,
Like
someone
that. I mean,
in a senior
you've
position.
had you've mhm.
I mean,
Someone who what? Say it again.
I was. This is someone in a senior position. I mean, not that it makes
Yeah,
things better or worse,
yeah,
but it's one thing to be,
yeah.
harassed by your bedside colleagues. It's something else when, the next level and then the next level and then the next level gets in on it.
Right. Right. Exactly. I mean, you've really highlighted the importance of centering the experiences of those harmed by
Yes.
racism, and Don Quinique in particular. And I really want to, want to think about how can nursing institutions and leaders better support nurses who are victims of discrimination and retaliation, in your opinion?
Believe them, number one. Just believe them. When Don Quinique, in these various all these instances of all these microaggressions. I mean, she was accused of theft at one point. She was challenged for dancing in the pod by her, where she was assigned by herself. On the night shift, she was moving around dancing just to stay awake or to stay up. Um, so
So I
it
guess I
looks.
have a question, and maybe this may be a question for her. But over time, if you've developed a relationship with her, did you ever ask her why did she stay?
I'm sorry, I missed that. Why did she?
Why did she stay? Did you ever did she ever say why she stayed? If you know this went on for if I'm correct, 2 years, and during the different, just all of the antics of the, I'm just going to say call it racism,
Sure.
dealing with all of the different, at different levels, right? Between her colleagues, her charge nurses, her leaders. You're being called, someone's telling you to come clean their home. You're being placed in a pod by yourself. What made her stay?
Um, the need for a job. She had a family. She had a husband, she had a daughter, and she needed a job, and she liked the work. She really connected with the patients, and she did things that she focused on things like a long bath. Someone who's been in the unit for several days and, they came in from a car accident and they've got dried blood all over them. I mean, she would get on that and until they were shining. And
Mhm.
that kind of physical contact, that kind of hands-on caring, was something that she does and that she's really motivated to do. Um, But she stayed because it's work. It's a job. And I know, lots of our Black colleagues have to basically make that same decision every day. Like, stay here, make this work, or try something else. I mean, the other thing too is the two hospitals that DonQuenick worked at prior to this, she also had, experiences in how she was treated. There was one hospital where they had some narcotics missing, and they picked one nurse and her to test out
Wow.
of the whole staff.
And the reason I ask that question is because, some people may say, well, just what I just said, right? Well, why would she stay? And I don't think that there's a good understanding as to, what your options are. There may be there may be a group of nurses who may have options to move on, but then you have a large number of group of nurses who do not necessarily have the same options. And that's why I asked that question,
Sure,
because
sure. Yeah.
it's not always, oh well, I'll go work at this hospital. That's not always an option for people. And people, when they really, really love what they do, they try to make things work, especially when you have a family and have children. So it's when we talk about the systemic racism that there is and that we have in nursing, it's important to also highlight that everyone just can't move around and everyone doesn't have the same options. People have, families, they have to put food on their table. People are the breadwinners. So it's just really just not always that easy to give up your benefits and the other things that come along with having a family. And I guess given the historical context of nursing and its evolution, what do you think are some concrete strategies that can be implemented to really dismantle the ingrained racism within, nursing education and the practice, right, of nursing?
Yeah. Well, I think that, certainly work, like I mentioned, Dr. McLemore's Robert Wood Johnson report really does a good job in kind of coalescing a lot of people's experiences. There's in preparing the materials for the videos and for the website, which we will be launching. I drew on a comment from her report, and it totally applies to DonQuenick's situation. And it's the report, what someone said in there was, yeah, when it's a white nurse, everybody's, with a tough patient, everybody's in there helping. The charge nurse is in there doing what they can. Everybody's asking, what do you need? But when a Black nurse has a difficult patient, all of a sudden, everybody's unavailable. Oh, I'm in rounds, I'm in depot, I can't come and help you. Or, so-and-so's at lunch, or they're all in their rooms suddenly busy. And she said it happens over and over. And, I think one of the things that white nurses have to do is read stuff like that and really think hard about it and what it says, and, find out where you fit in all of that. And even, closely examining your own language. I mean, I'm a white dude. I blunder around, mindlessly like most white dudes do, and do stupid things and do things without thinking. And, I look back at things I said that I thought were like complimentary, or I thought were like, just nice conversational things to say. And it's like, yeah, no, that's kind of weird. So I think our consciousness really needs to change. I think a lot of it comes down to sitting down and be quiet. Hey, white nurses, white nurse leaders, sit down, stop talking. Let others take the stage. Let others do the talking. It's not so much of, okay, so what can I as a white nurse leader do? Boom, boom, boom. It's like, well, maybe what you can do is just step back and open the door, or hold the door open for someone else, a Black nurse, to step forward and kind of take over from you. I mean, I think that's a big part of it.
Well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today and sharing DonQuenick's story. This is a very powerful story. And, just like Redonda, right? Redonda got a lot of media attention with her story. And, this was someone who did actually admit to being rushed and doing harm. And not that, for me being an empathetic person, my heart goes out to her as well. However, with DonQuenick's story, this is definitely a different story that doesn't have the media attention, and it really, really deserves it. It really deserves the media attention. And
Oh,
if
absolutely.
we got to make sure that everything that you have going on with for her fundraiser, the website, we're going to put everything in the show notes so that people can know how to how they can be a part of a movement, because this is what
Yes.
really should become as well, a
Yeah.
movement. And I would love to talk more offline about how we can help her and how we can bring her story and bring more attention to her story, because it's so needed. So again, I thank you for coming on, Gerard. I really, really do thank you so
Oh,
much for coming
my
on
pleasure.
today. And
Thank
please
you.
send let DonQuenick know that we stand with her
I
with
will,
everything that she
absolutely.
has
Yeah,
going on.
I
All
will. No,
right.
and I thank
Right.
you for really, this is the kickoff. This is the start.
Yes.
This episode is kind of like the beginning of what we're doing to bring this case and the issues to light, to bring it to attention of people in the nursing community, as well as to the public at large. Because you mentioned the other case in Tennessee. This is kind of like the opposite. This is kind of like not a mirror image identical, but kind of like
Right.
yin and black and white. And the response of nurses in the nursing community. I mean, last weekend or the weekend before, Redonda was a featured speaker at the Texas Nurses Association convention.
Right.
And
Yeah. So,
so,
and I'm a legal nurse consultant, and she was a featured speaker at I think it was last year. I
yeah.
think it was at last year's legal nurse consulting convention. So,
Mhm,
to
mhm.
your point, we need to give the same empathy and support to all of our nurses who are in
Yes.
need. So, again, I thank you so much for coming on today. So there you have it, guys. Until next time, make sure that you stay educated, stay empowered, and stay inspired.